King Charles has said no. Absolutely not.
Well, joining me now is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, King Charles and Prince Harry met for the first time in nearly 2 years earlier this month. There's speculation Harry would like to be in Britain a bit more, but the King has reportedly said there's no such thing as half in, half out.
Enough is enough. That's the line attributed to the Prince of Wales tonight, as he moved with urgency to Scotland for a private, one-on-one with the King at Balmoral. No photo call, no entourage, just the heir and the sovereign behind a heavy door, confronting a crisis of trust that will not go away. Good evening and welcome. Thanks for choosing to spend your time with us. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, tap the bell, and drop your thoughts in the live chat so your voice is part of this conversation. Here's what we know. The monarchy is under renewed strain after old emails recirculated online, dragging the Duchess of York back into headlines for past proximity to Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke of York, already forced from frontline duties, is again the gravitational center of a scandal that distorts everything around it. Public patience is thin. Donors, veterans, and community partners ask the same blunt question: what, if anything, is going to change? The answer may be forming at Balmoral. According to multiple palace watchers, the Prince and Princess of Wales have been advocating a hard line. Stability through standards, dignity through discipline. The King, mindful of family bonds and the fragility of a centuries-old institution, prefers to avoid public ruptures that could widen into permanent rifts. That is the tension. Tonight, it is being tested face to face. Your Majesty, the institution cannot survive reputational drift. That is how one senior aide characterizes the Prince's message walking into the meeting. We are told Catherine helped set that tone. She is not in the room, but her imprint is. She has been described by insiders as the architect of a simple 3-step framework now circulating at Kensington and Clarence House. Verify, respond, enforce. In plain terms, check the facts, speak with clarity, and act with consequences. Quiet influence, loud implications. Let's be clear about the stakes. The Order of the Garter, Britain's oldest chivalric order, sits in the foreground of this debate. Removing a member is rare and symbolic, the kind of thunderclap that reverberates for decades. Keep it, and the message could read as indulgence. Remove it, and the palace risks accusations of turning on its own. This is not legislative politics. It is narrative politics, the contest to define what the crown stands for when the light is harsh and the cameras are close. Observers note the generational handover is no longer hypothetical. The Prince and Princess of Wales are setting expectations now, not waiting for a later date to inherit the problems unsolved today. Draw the line, then hold it, is how one commentator summarizes their posture. It aligns with a public mood that favors clean breaks with old controversies. But the King's view is not simply leniency. It is the calculus of a monarch. Preserve the fabric, mend quietly, absorb shock so the system does not split. In parallel, a softer, quieter figure moves through the frame. The Queen. Ceremony is her domain. Comment is not. Her approach, keep the program steady, let storms pass, has supporters who see prudence in restraint. But critics call it an absence of moral temperature, a kind of soft opposition to reform by doing nothing. That perception, fair or not, adds texture to tonight's meeting. The cameras will capture handshakes tomorrow. They will not capture the shadow negotiations of tone and timing that happen in hallways. Listen to the language filtering out of Balmoral. Accountability is not hostility, one source paraphrases the Prince. We protect the future by being exacting in the present. Then the counternote attributed to the King. We repair by degrees, not by detonations. Neither quote is on the record. Both feel true to their public profiles. Between those sentences is the path they must draw. Catherine's voice is audible in the strategy sheets, we're told, even if it never appears at a lectern. She urges clarity without cruelty, a focus on victims when allegations are discussed. and a firm policy that personal friendships cannot outweigh institutional credibility. Reputation isn't collateral, is said to be a line in her notes. The phrase has already migrated into briefing memos picked up by several desks. This is not drama for its own sake. This is brand surgery under harsh light. The York question is not the only brief on the Balmoral table. The possibility of future reconciliation with the Duke of Sussex hovers nearby, volatile and unresolved. The King, by temperament and history, keeps the door ajar. The Prince of Wales keeps his conditions explicit. We cannot rebuild one bridge by burning another, the King is said to caution. We cannot rebuild any bridge on quicksand, comes the reply. It is, in miniature, the larger argument, compassion versus containment, legacy versus reform. What happens if the Garter becomes the flashpoint? Expect a cascade. Protocol reviews, tightened guest lists, sharper lines between private gatherings and public duties, and a communication policy that elevates speed and specificity over euphemism. Expect, too, a renewed emphasis on service optics, hospital visits, community projects, military engagements, delivered with a no-nonsense cadence that says, the work continues. In that design, Catherine's hand would be unmistakable, measured appearances, precise messaging, and an insistence on dignity that does not need to be announced to be understood. There is also a risk. A decisive cut can be read as fair or as ruthless, depending on the day and the headline. The King knows this. The heir knows it too. But the difference, as analysts frame it, is priority. The King privileges cohesion, the heir privileges clarity. Neither is inherently wrong. Both will be judged in the court of public attention, where context is scarce and sentiment swings fast. Within the castle, the conversation narrows. Do we agree, the prince might ask, that consequence does not equal cruelty? A pause. We agree, the king may say. That consequence must consider the whole. The heir is heavy and careful. The institution is large, but the decision is small enough to fit on a single signature line. Meanwhile, the outside world keeps time with a different clock, one measured in notifications, clips, and comment threads stacking up under the latest headline. For viewers joining us now, here's the line that matters tonight. Balmoral is not a retreat. It is a crucible. The father and the son are not at war. They are negotiating the future. And Catherine, without a podium, is shaping the terms. We'll continue to track who sets the pace from here, whether reform moves first or legacy pulls it back. Stay with us, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us, should standards speak louder than sentiment? The next development may arrive without warning, and when it does, we'll be here with the facts, the context, and the questions that follow. Inside Balmoral tonight, the pace is methodical, staff movements are trimmed to essentials, papers pass in thin folders rather than thick binders. The meeting between the King and the Prince of Wales has narrowed to options, timelines, and the consequence map that follows each choice. Sources familiar with the discussion say 3 tracks sit on the table. Track 1. Symbolic restraint. Retain decorum. Issue a clarifying statement. Keep the Order of the Garter out of the blast radius for now. Track 2. Conditional censure. Suspend ceremonial privileges attached to the order while an internal standard review runs to completion. Track 3. Decisive rupture. Initiate steps to remove honorary standing, accept the shock, and build a public rationale around institutional integrity. The heir, we are told, argues that ambiguity has already cost time and trust. Standards are an action, not a caption, is how one aide paraphrases his position. He is not lobbying the cameras, he is lobbying the calendar. Clarity now, then service tomorrow, and repetition until the noise subsides. From Kensington, Catherine's influence travels by memo and by brief. She has pressed a simple chain. Verify the facts. Respond in plain language. Enforce consequences proportionate to the reputational risk, not to family discomfort. In one internal exchange described to us, Catherine is said to have used a blunt line. No one is above the communication plan. That is not a rebuke, it is a rule. In the adjoining corridors, soft power is present without being named. The Queen keeps the ceremonial spine straight, appointments held, schedules honoured, the public face unchanged. Supporters call it steadiness. Detractors call it distance. The effect is the same. The optics run on time, while the substance is argued elsewhere. It reads as composure. It risks reading as detachment if the substance stalls. We are hearing of a draft statement shaped by the verify, respond, enforce mantra. It would acknowledge public concern in unvarnished terms, affirm the Crown's duty to safeguard the dignity of national honours, and outline a process with clear stages and dates. Not a performative apology, not a fog of euphemism, a timetable and a threshold. Cross it. Consequences follow. 2 short conversations illustrate the divide. We repair by degrees, the King is reported to have said, noting that sudden breaks invite unintended fractures. We repair by deciding, the Prince is said to have answered, noting that drift is itself a decision with costs. Neither sentence shouts. Both cut. The Andrew file remains the gravitational centre. Any movement on the Garter would be historic and controversial, yet palace veterans quietly note that inaction is also a choice with a headline. A decision not to decide is still a decision, one senior courtier says, underlining the bind that has trapped the institution before and could trap it again if caution stretches into passivity. There is another layer, the Sussex question. The King's door, as ever, is ajar. The heir's terms, as ever, are explicit. The present talks are not a bargaining chip toward reconciliation, but they set the precedent that any return to proximity must pass through the same gate of standards. The phrase moving through notes tonight is stark. One policy, all names. Catherine's role is clearest in the logistics of language. She favours short sentences, active voice, zero jargon. She has also asked for a victim's first line whenever allegations are referenced, even when the institution is not a party to litigation. We will not use process to eclipse people, is a sentence said to appear in her margin notes. It shifts emphasis from palace discomfort to public harm, and it tests whether the Crown can sound human without sounding defensive. Camilla's silhouette, meanwhile, frames the cautionary alternative. Keep the right smooth. Let editors tire. Let the story collapse under its own repetition. That strategy has worked before, but its shelf life is shorter in the age of rolling clips and searchable archives. Doing nothing now communicates something, whether intended or not. The silence is read and recorded. What changes if the middle track, conditional censure, wins the night? Expect a statement that announces a review with named milestones, followed by a visible downgrading of ceremonial visibility for the Duke of York. No processions, no platforms, no borrowed gravitas from state pageantry. If the final track, decisive rupture, emerges, expect fewer words and more paperwork. The symbolism would do the speaking. Listen to one more exchange as it is relayed to us. Is this cruelty? The King is said to ask, weighing the blow of a formal removal. It is clarity, the Prince replies. Cruelty is asking the public to pretend they do not see. No raised voices, no threat. Just the old institution talking to its newer conscience, line by line, until a signature turns talk into policy. By the hour's end, staff wait for a signal. The draft can be dated tonight, or placed in a drawer for another cycle of deliberation. Either way, the clock outside the castle keeps moving. The institution will answer, in words or in silence, and the country will read the answer. Inside the castle, the outlines of a decision are being drawn in pencil, not ink. A trimmed list of aides moves between 2 rooms, one where the King confers with his private secretary, another where the Prince of Wales waits with a legal advisor and a communications lead on standby. The working draft in circulation is tight, 3 paragraphs, 3 verbs, no surplus adjectives. The verb choices matter. Acknowledge, protect, enforce. The first paragraph would acknowledge public concern in plain language, with an explicit reference to the standards attached to national honours. The second would affirm the Crown's duty to protect the credibility of those honours regardless of surname. The third would explain the enforcement track without theatrics, temporary suspension from ceremonial participation while a standards review reaches its final recommendation, or a formal removal if the threshold is met. The threshold is described as reputational risk beyond reasonable remediation. A senior official describes the dynamic this way. The king wants a staircase. The prince wants a door. In practice, the staircase is a staged process that grants the institution room to adjust. The door is a single moment after which ambiguity ends. In the corridor outside the meeting, there is a short exchange. If we build stairs, we must still know where they lead, the prince says. And if we close a door, the other rooms must hold, the king replies. Each line is measured, careful about ripples. Catherine's fingerprints are on the language that would go out if the staircase wins the night. She has argued for short sentences, no euphemisms, and a victim's first framing that doesn't conflate institutional prudence with silence. Her guidance to the communications team remains consistent. No passive voice where active voice will do, no references to issues when the public hears allegations, and no release that requires a second release to explain it. In a briefing earlier today, she was direct. We are not negotiating with a headline, we are setting a standard. Camilla's presence is almost entirely ceremonial, but it is noted. She maintains the rhythm of the day, appointments kept, a charity visit confirmed, a wreath laid as scheduled. That steadiness plays well with traditionalists. It also invites a critique that the choreography continues, as if the underlying debate is not existential. A courtier puts it plainly. Her brief is continuity. Tonight, continuity feels like commentary. Beyond the walls, stakeholders prepare their own responses. Veterans groups will want clarity about who stands with them at parades. Charities will look for a line that says the Crown understands safeguarding reputations is part of safeguarding beneficiaries. Commonwealth leaders, briefed informally, will scan for precedent. If Britain moves on a storied order, what message echoes across their own honours systems? The draft notes attempt to anticipate these reads. The middle sentence in paragraph 2, honours exist to reflect service, not to shield it, is engineered to travel well. Legal sensitivity tightens the drafting. Any reference to the Duke of York is couched in neutral terms, as the palace cannot and will not litigate allegations in public. The line that survives every edit is institutional, the Crown's obligation to protect the meaning of its symbols. That is where the prince's argument finds its strongest ground. He has said, in private, that consistency across names is the only way standards can be believed. One policy, all names, is printed at the top of his prep notes. There is a logistical plan if a decision triggers escalation. Press offices at Kensington and Buckingham would release synchronized statements within minutes. An frequently asked questions sheet would follow, explaining the difference between ceremonial privileges and legal rights. A quietly scheduled meeting with a veterans charity would signal the forward look. Service undisturbed, focus unchanged. Catherine has pushed for a short, pre-recorded message from the prince within 48 hours, no interview, no questions, reiterating that the institution acts to protect public trust, not to punish without process. The scenario in which decisive rupture is chosen has its own choreography. There would be fewer words and a heavier emphasis on the paperwork. Notices to relevant chapters, updated ceremonial lists, and guidance circulated to event organisers across the calendar. The palace has rehearsed the tone, restrained, not triumphant, certain, not strident. The king's private concern, that a hard break will be interpreted as a family fracture, remains. The counter-argument from the heir focuses on the public ledger. Every day of drift costs capital that cannot be easily restored. One more exchange is relayed from inside. Are we navigating sentiment or safeguarding meaning? The king asks. Safeguarding meaning shapes the sentiment, the prince answers. The room falls quiet. Staff wait for the signal that tells them which template to load. The Sussex question hovers, but does not headline. It is parked on a parallel track with a single line running through both dossiers. Any change in proximity must pass the same test applied elsewhere. That uniformity is part principle, part shield. It protects the institution from accusations of improvisation. It also protects the decision-makers from charges of personal bias. By late evening, the mechanics are ready. A statement can be dated. A call sheet can be activated. A press lockup can be convened with a short embargo. None of that answers the human part, a family that has to live with the echo of whatever is chosen tonight. But the institution is not built to narrate feelings. It is built to set terms. Inside Balmoral, terms are being set. Outside, the audience is already writing its verdict. Lights move in the press room. Screens refresh. Phones buzz in tight concentric circles. The statement is cleared. Timestamps align across Buckingham and Kensington. 3 paragraphs, 3 verbs. The staircase chosen with a locked handrail. Acknowledge, protect, enforce. At 19 local time, the words appear. They acknowledge public concern directly, by name and not by euphemism. They reaffirm that national honours reflect service and cannot be used as buffers against scrutiny. They announce an immediate suspension of the Duke of York's ceremonial participation attached to the Order of the Garter, pending a standards review with defined milestones and a hard deadline. Dates are written in full. The threshold for final action is explicit. Reputational risk beyond reasonable remediation. There is no flourish. There is no coda. The line that catches attention first is short. Honours exist to reflect service, not to shield it. Within minutes, the sentence runs on ticker bars and in the corner of panel shows. The absence of adjectives becomes a message in itself. The institution has chosen process as posture and timeline as tone. Inside Balmoral, the split-screen reality continues. The king signs the statement with a steady hand. He sets the pen down and asks for the next steps to be read back. Standards review convenes at 9:30 tomorrow. Interim report in 10 days. Final recommendation in 6 weeks. The Prince of Wales listens, expression fixed. He wanted the door, he has the staircase, reinforced with a deadline that turns steps into a march. We will keep faith with the timeline, he says. The king nods. No triumph, no dissent. Just acceptance of a path both can defend. Catherine is not in the frame, but her document is. The communications plan that follows the release carries her imprint. Short sentences, active voice, no legal speculation, a victim's, first clause in the Q&A materials, and a clear description of the difference between ceremonial privileges and legal status. One aide reads her margin note aloud before the team disperses. We do not use process to evacuate empathy. The phrasing makes it into the social copy prepared for the morning briefings. Camilla's schedule holds. She moves through a previously planned engagement, quiet, composed, measured. Cameras capture handshakes and a few restrained smiles. Questions are thrown, answers are not. The poise plays well on broadcast. Online, the silence draws split reactions. Relief from those who prefer the monarchy as fixed furniture, suspicion from those who see silence as complicity. Neither reaction changes her pace. Continuity remains the point. Reactions arrive on predictable lines. Veterans associations welcome the clarity on ceremonies. A spokesperson for a large charity praises the direct language, then adds, pointedly, that trust is earned by what happens next. A former courtier tells a broadcaster the palace has relearned the value of short words. Commentators carve the familiar trench, the king's patience versus the heir's precision. The phrase conditional censure becomes the headline label. The Duke of York's circle lets it be known, through intermediaries, that he remains committed to supporting charitable causes privately. There is no direct quote. There is quiet revolt at the word suspension and a refusal to accept the notion of reputational thresholds. "You cannot quantify a shadow," says one ally off camera. The counterpoint from a constitutional scholar lands an hour later. Symbols live or die by public reading. That reading is quantification, whether we like it or not. In a compact recording session, the Prince of Wales tapes a message to be used if needed. It is short, under a minute. He says the institution acts to protect the meaning of its honours and the trust of those who serve under them. He does not say the Duke's name. He does not mention family. He signs off with a line tucked in deliberately. Standards are not hostility. The clip sits in a folder labelled for mourning. Release is a bridge to cross only if confusion blooms overnight. The king pauses in a corridor and asks one last question of his private secretary. "Are we leading sentiment or following it?" The reply is careful. "We are aligning meaning with expectations, sir." The king accepts the phrasing. He knows that meaning without expectation becomes nostalgia, and expectation without meaning becomes noise. The choice tonight tries to thread both. Beyond London, the Commonwealth watch silently. A Governor-General's office sends a polite note acknowledging receipt of the statement and requesting the review's terms of reference when they are public. In several capitals, honours committees mark the date, not for mimicry but for awareness. The Crown's decision radiates along old lines. In the media rhythm, interviews multiply. A veteran's advocate voices fatigue with ambiguity. A former palace press chief, no friend to sensationalism, applauds the timetable and warns that 6 weeks can feel like 6 months in an age of constant replay. The review must show its work, he says. Silence is not prudence if the public reads it as stalling. Inside Kensington, Catherine sits with a small team to finalise the frequently asked questions sheet. She removes a hedgeword here, adds a clarifying clause there. The first question reads, "What does suspension of ceremonial participation mean?" The answer lists specifics: no processions, no public platforms, no utilisation of royal platforms for profile. A second question addresses victims. How does this decision account for those affected by allegations? The answer avoids legal traps and centres on duty of care, language chosen to avoid grandstanding and to resist the pull of abstraction. She declines to add her name to any of the materials. The work is the signature. A late exchange in Balmoral bears repeating. "If the review recommends removal, will we act?" the prince asks. "We will act," the king replies. "And if the review recommends retention, will we stand?" the prince presses. The king meets his eye. "We will stand, with reasons we can read aloud. That is the bargain tonight has struck. A staircase built to carry both men in the same direction, with a landing at which certainty will be spoken, not implied. For now, the system breathes. The phone's quiet. The statement travels, line by line, into the feeds and newsletters that will shape morning opinion. On a different page of the calendar, another dossier waits. The conditions under which a estranged prince might be invited into a smaller circle of proximity. The lesson from tonight is already penciled at the top of that file. One policy, all names. Overnight metrics tell a clean story. The statement reached saturation. The key sentence took hold, and the phrase, "suspension of ceremonial participation," entered public vocabulary without confusion. By morning, attention pivots from what was said to how it will be done. The standards review convenes as advertised. A narrow room, a precise agenda, a chair who declines adjectives. Attendance is capped to limit leaks. Notes are kept in bullet points, not prose. The first hour is definitional. What constitutes reputational risk beyond reasonable remediation? The chair proposes 3 indicators: persistence, proximity, and public confidence. Persistence measures whether controversy has endured despite corrective steps. Proximity measures how directly the individual's actions, relationships, or statements intersect with the honor in question. Public confidence measures whether the honor's meaning still reads true when linked to that name. The room agrees to weight all three, with public confidence carrying the heaviest share. It is a pragmatic choice. Symbols live or die by reading. At Kensington, Catherine's brief to communications is equally functional. No commentary on process, only updates on milestones. Questions about personalities are redirected to principles. Staff rehearse variations of the same sentence. The review is independent in method and bounded by timeline. She asks for one additional line on outreach. If victims' advocates write in, they receive a timely acknowledgement that avoids legal evaluation but affirms duty of care. We do not confuse empathy with adjudication, she says. The distinction will matter when the inbox fills. The king spends the early afternoon with his private secretary reviewing the calendar. There are parades ahead and commemorations fixed by tradition. The guidance is tightened. Ceremonial rosters will reflect the suspension immediately. Event partners will be briefed before doors open, not after headlines land. No surprises to those doing the work, the king instructs. It is an unshowy sentence with practical teeth. Reaction lines harden in the press. Commentators aligned with continuity argue the staircase model is the correct one. A visible process, a visible endpoint, and no theatrical rupture that writes itself into family law. Reform-minded voices point to the weight assigned to public confidence and ask aloud if that weight, honestly applied, can lead anywhere but one conclusion. The divide is familiar, but the terrain is new. A 6-week clock creates discipline that both camps must respect. Inside the review, a second session examines precedent. The chair resists language that would lock future panels into narrow lanes. The goal is a framework, not handcuffs. A legal advisor cautions against references that could be read as findings of fact. The outcome must be administrative, not judicial. A communications observer, sitting quietly at the back, notes the power of verbs. Recommend, not rule, determine, not declare. The vocabulary is spare by design. A small ripple arrives from Windsor. A veterans leader emails thanks for the clarity and asks for assurance that honours worn at community events reflect service untouched by controversy. The reply is crisp and unadorned. Rosters under review, standards being applied, timelines public. The conversation stays focused on the meaning of symbols in the field, not the weather of headlines. It is the sort of exchange that does more work than a dozen interviews. Camilla keeps to a children's literacy visit. Photos circulate, kneeling to talk at eye level. A brief reading. A quiet exit. The images have their own gravity. Supporters praise the normalcy. Critics call it curated distance. Both readings coexist. The Queen neither invites nor corrects them. Continuity remains her argument. By late afternoon, a draft interim structure is ready. 3 public touchpoints before the final recommendation. First, publication of the review's terms of reference in plain English. Second, a midpoint update confirming evidence types examined, correspondence, timelines, public impact, without naming sources. Third, a public explanation of how the 3 indicators were weighted. Each step aims to show work without breaching confidences. The chair signs off on the outline. The Prince of Wales, briefed en route between engagements, asks one question: will people understand it the first time they hear it? The answer is yes. He repeats his refrain. Short sentences. In private, the king and the prince meet again. The exchange is unvarnished. We built the staircase, the king begins. We must walk it, the prince replies. If the landing requires a hard turn, the king asks, do we have the muscle to take it without breaking stride? The reply is immediate. If the landing requires a different outcome, do we have the discipline to explain it without apology? They shake on both possibilities. The handshake is the governance. The discipline will be the test. The Sussex file is opened at a side table. There is no movement today. Only a notation that any future discussion will reference the same indicators. One policy, all names. It is not a slogan now, it is a shield. It protects against claims that standards bend to proximity. It also sets a cost for any deviation high enough to deter improvisation. Online, the atmosphere calms a degree. The absence of new noise is not silence, it is acceptance that the next piece of news is scheduled rather than improvised. In newsrooms, producers build segments for the midpoint update. In community halls, event organizers adjust seating charts to reflect updated rosters. The machinery of public life adapts quickly when instructions are clear. A final internal detail underscores the shift. The line, "Standards are not hostility," is approved for limited use in briefing notes to stakeholders, but withheld from broadcast scripts. The institution is learning to speak plainly to those who must act on its decisions, while avoiding the rhetoric that invites endless debate. Catherine signs off on that calibration with a single annotation. Audience defines tone. As the first day of the review closes, nothing dramatic has happened, and something fundamental has changed. The Crown has chosen cadence over spectacle. The public has been given a map and a clock. The actors within the story, king, heir, consort, councillors, have fixed their lanes. The next inflection point is calendared, not guessed. And the subject at the centre of the process is no longer the only story. The process itself has become the narrative the country will judge. Here's where the story stands tonight. The staircase is built, the milestones are public, and the clock is running. The Standards Panel has published its terms of reference, confirmed evidence lanes, and set the date for a final recommendation. Ceremonial rosters now reflect the suspension in full. The institution has shifted from speculation to procedure. Inside the palaces, the lanes are clear. The King owns the cadence, steady and deliberate. The Prince of Wales owns the doctrine, simple and repeatable. One policy, all names. Catherine owns the language, short, precise, victims first, no euphemisms. Camilla owns continuity, engagements kept, tone unruffled, the optics of routine holding their line. The impact is measurable. Partners know who will stand on platforms. Veterans know who will march. Charities know where the Crown is placing its weight. The phrase that defined this week, "Honours exist to reflect service, not to shield it," has already begun to change how bookings are made and how invitations are worded. 2 sentences frame the landing we're heading toward. From the King, we repair by degrees. From the Prince, we repair by deciding. The degrees now have dates. The decision has a threshold. Reputational risk beyond reasonable remediation. If the panel advises removal, the paperwork is ready and the symbolism will speak for itself. If it advises retention, the reasons will be read aloud, not implied between commas. Catherine's last adjustment to the playbook is a quiet one, an internal instruction to close every stakeholder call with the same line. Standards are not hostility. It is not for broadcast. It is for discipline, the kind that keeps tone even when headlines bend. Camilla's path is unchanged. There is no commentary from her office, no deviation from schedule. That restraint will be read both ways, as ever. But it keeps the family's ceremonial spine straight, while the system tests its policy nerves. So the next noise you hear may be the last word on this chapter. A recommendation, a signature, and a short statement that fits on one screen. No victory laps, no spectacle. Just an institution choosing meaning over drift, process over performance, and a future where the rules are said once and kept. Thank you for watching and staying with us through every turn. If you value this kind of clear, fact-first coverage, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and tell us what you think below. Your take shapes what we dig into next.